a book, not a regular book, but a wrestling book. Well, do we have a treat for you on today's Over the Guardrail podcast? Me and DC get to interview Vinnie Berry, an author who helped write the book Lance by Chance, Wrestling as Con Erickson. So thank you for joining us, Vinnie. Thank you for coming on our podcast today.
Yeah. Hey, I don't mean to correct you, but it's Wrestling as a Von Erich.
There you go. See? So Wrestling as a Von Erich. So at least, I'm not the author here, so.
Well, and I say that because those who, are familiar with the Von Erichs been off the scene for years and years and years, right? But their legacy is alive and well here in the state of Texas, and I think it will be
exactly
for a long, long time. So
probably close to where Christina's brother-in-law is, or brother is down there. Fort Worth was their stomping grounds, right, Vinny?
Absolutely. Yeah, they wrestled at the Will Rogers Coliseum on Monday nights in Fort Worth, and then they did the Sportatorium Friday nights. Of course, they hit all the towns in between throughout the week. But yeah, that was where the magic was happening up there in the world-class championship wrestling promotion.
Yeah, being up here in the Northeast, my first love was WWF, which it was at the time. We saw a lot of that being in the New York area, but I was lucky enough to catch a lot of world class because back then ESPN would show that. So I got to see a lot of the Von Erichs.
Yeah, and they were fun to watch. Absolutely. I mean, when I moved down here, or I moved to Texas in 1980, I didn't know much about wrestling at all. And before you knew it, probably about 1982, I started catching on to the Von Erichs, and it was hard not to watch wrestling down here. It was exciting. It was they started shooting it different. They were presenting wrestling differently, and they were just really on the cutting edge. And the characters and the storylines that they had in that promotion was almost secondary to the popularity of the Von Erichs. And I just can't stress how popular those young men were.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can't say fan favorite without talking about the Von Erichs. It was just a different scene. I remember watching, and they would mob the ring almost. Before they would wrestle, they'd let them come up and write and sign autographs and stuff like that. It was totally different than today's scene.
Yeah, today's scene, you have to hide behind barriers and all that stuff now.
Right. Yeah, and down there back then, they'd come down the aisles. All they had was like a little string, if that, or two guys around them, and then they, people were, like you said, mobbing them as they were walking to the ring. People of all ages just wanted to touch them. There was women of all ages hanging all over them, and then before the matches, you could go up there with your program or your picture. And as they were announcing the fighters or the wrestlers, you could get them to sign. And I just, there's no way you can't get that close to the ring anymore. But that was, that was part of the mystique. Give the people what they wanted. And if you didn't get your paper signed then or your program signed then, you'd have another chance.
That's true.
Well,
so Vinnie, So Vinnie, tell us about how you became a writer. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because I know, I'm guessing you're not a wrestler. I didn't know if you were secretly wanting to be a wrestler. That's why you wanted to start writing wrestler books. But tell us a little bit about how all this became when you were a youngster, being I love wrestling and now I'm going to write for wrestlers.
Well, I've always enjoyed writing. It was just one of my favorite things to do. I felt like I was pretty good at it. A lot of people around me always thought I was pretty good at it. I was never really as good as I wanted to be, but I always enjoyed doing it. And if I had to choose between writing and math, I wasn't choosing math, So, and I always had, there was something about combative sports for me. I tried collegiate wrestling or high school wrestling, mat wrestling in high school. I did suffer a broken wrist early on in there, so I never really visited that again. There's something about wrestling on concrete with a 2-inch pad between you and it it hurt, you know. But I got into amateur boxing, and then as I got older, actually when I moved down here to Texas, I ran into some guys that were the boxing and MMA scene in South Texas when I moved here 10 years ago was hot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I just told them, I said, hey, I used to write and I used to box, so I know a little bit about the sport, and I just started working with those guys, and we were just really doing it like a hobby, but there was nobody doing it down here like that. There was nobody giving the promotions a presence or any recognition, and so we took that upon ourselves, and we created our own little media outlet, and I just moved around to a couple. Like when one friend would shut his website down, another friend would open it, and before you know it, I caught the eye of a MMA promoter who hired me to work for his sister, or work with his family business, but next to his sister in the PR and doing the website and writing stories about the fights and stuff. So I started doing that, and I did that for about 1.5 years, and I even became his matchmaker, which was a job that fell in my lap. But he would call me up, and he'd say, the promoter would say, hey, it's 2 days before the fight or 3 days before the fight, and so-and-so pulled out, and we have nobody to fight the champion, and what are we going to do? And I was like, call so-and-so. Get this guy. Why don't you call that guy? I'd give him like 5 names right off the top of my head, and he'd say, well, how do you know these guys? And I was like, because I write about these guys. I know who the players are in Texas, you know? So before you knew it, I ended up taking that job, that matchmaking job, which I had to learn a lot about MMA. But, that it all worked out well. And, just doing those was, in preparation to the book, well, to wrap that story up, I worked for him about a total 1.5 years. He went ahead and closed his promotion and moved, and I was missing writing, and I started wanting to do a website, and I just told my wife, hey, I got to keep on writing. The momentum's going, and then I started a wrestling website called Wrestleville.com, and that was how I met Lance. And so, not ever writing a book before, I probably went in with, 500 short stories under my belt, before, writing about 4 or 5 years for these websites. I was ready to go.
Now, with, you were talking about, getting to know Lance and all that stuff. Now, did he sit down with you one time, or was it several different times that he sat with you, telling you all the crazy stories of what happened back then?
Well, let's see. I met Lance. Now, how I met Lance is I was talking to referee James Beard, and me and him struck up a friendship, and we were talking for a little while, or talking from time to time, and he was a referee at World Class, actually right after Lance's time in World Class. So they kind of, one was on the way out and one was on his way in. And I think James might have been working there, but he was working he'd be the referee, he was like the referee in training. So they didn't always cross paths, So anyway, he taught me. He told me how to get in touch with Lance, because every time Lance would come up, I'd say, "Man, what a good story that would be," And everybody's thought was, well, he was put in a bad situation, because they put the Von Erich name on him, and they had all these expectations for him, and just to paint a picture about the Von Erichs, they're probably like what Hulk Hogan was, in Madison Square Garden in Texas.
Sure.
He's. Yep. I mean, the people. We're talking about 35 years removed. So it's like, I was really trying to, in the book, to capture this, how popular they were. And, these guys were on fire, man. I mean, these guys were popular. And so they bring in Lance, and there was all this pressure on him to meet the expectations. But what people didn't understand, and a lot of people, they don't give him credit for, oh, he wasn't that good of a wrestler. Oh, he was a terrible wrestler. Oh, he was this. That dude was a good wrestler. And I say that because, and I say it because he had no wrestling training. He basically, they discovered this guy. They sent him to Portland after training him for a month or two, couple months. They sent him to Portland, and then they rushed him up there, and they brought him down here because they needed Von Erichs. And so, and if you read the book and you understand a little bit about Lance, he's an extremist. So everything he does to the best of his ability, whether it's unhealthy or healthy or good or bad or negative result or positive result. He'll just go. So,
Vinny, you talk about they were looking for Von Erichs, just to fill people in a little bit. When they were looking for Von Erichs, is this after David's death, or did one of them get sick? Is that why they were looking for people?
Well, yeah, and you got to understand back then. So a lot of people, and again, you'll learn this when you read the book, and a lot of people don't quite understand this. But had there not been a Freebird Von Erich feud, we might not be talking about Lance Von Erich. And had David Von Erich not died, we wouldn't be talking about Lance Von Erich. Go ahead, Chris. Are you going to ask something?
Crazy. No, that's just crazy. I'm just like, you would have never known.
Well, back then, they wrote television for, and this is what I didn't know. I learned this from David Manning. They wrote television for 8 months in advance.
Wow.
So they're looking far in the future. So David Von Erich dies in 1984. And and we talk about this, is like, a lot of people say, well, Lance didn't get there till 1985. How could you start the book in 1982 or whatever? And that's going back to that Von Erich Freebird feud. And because Mike Von Erich had made his debut in 1983, and what a lot of people don't understand, Mike didn't want to be a wrestler. Him and Lance had something in common. They didn't love wrestling. Lance says all the time, the people that were good in wrestling loved it. And, Mike didn't love wrestling. He didn't want to do that, but he was a Von Erich. And so going back to your question, you've got the live tapings on Monday, the live tapings on Friday, and then you've got the shows during the week where you're doing high schools and armories all over the state of Texas and maybe Oklahoma. You're going to Lawton, and you're going to Waco and San Antonio and Austin and all the little towns in between, and they're probably running 2 shows a night.
Oh wow.
So that's actually like 8 matches, and like an A and a B town, I guess you want to call it. And so now you've got Kevin and Kerry, and you've got Mike, and the office really didn't think Mike was ready for the Freebird feud. Of course, he wrestled with them and stuff, but he was very small. He was small, and he was new, and but then he came down with that injury in 85, August of 85, September I think it was actually, and when the first time they went to Israel, and he had surgery, and he contracted toxic shock syndrome, and he was out of it. And so that's when they brought Lance in. So, there was a high demand for these Von Erichs. Steve Casey says that, hey, back then you needed a Von Erich on the card every night, and sometimes Lance was the only Von Erich.
Oh, wow.
And
no pressure at all.
No pressure at all. And not only this, but a lot of people. I mean, go on YouTube. There's a baby doll interview. There's a Bob Orton interview. Those are just a couple, but there's a lot of wrestlers that worked back then or knew the Von Erichs. Knew of their reputation of not always showing up, not always honoring their commitment. And so that was one of the things that really, exhausted Lance because, there came a time, in '86, Kerry had a motorcycle accident. Mike had his toxic shock syndrome, and Kevin had a shoulder injury, and Lance was the only Von Erich. And he's working 2 times on a regular basis for a long time, and he said a year and a half. That even if that's accurate, even if it's even half that time, 2 times a night, 7 times, 6 times, 7 times a week, that's still exhausting, right? So that was one of the things that was an issue for him.
Lance is such a great topic, I think, that you picked for a book as well, because there's so much information out there about wrestling and a lot of books coming out. It's not to knock anybody else's book, but sometimes you pick a wrestler that everybody knows a lot about already. And Lance is one of those subjects. I think you've brought up a few points already that wrestling fans, even like me that grew up watching it, they don't know or they don't realize.
Well, tell me this, David. I'll ask you. What was your thought of who Lance was before he came down as a Von Erich? What's been your idea or thought, or what was your belief of that?
I wouldn't have known until I just started researching it that he even existed. Back in '85, I was about 10 years old and just getting into wrestling. So when he would have come on the scene in world class, I wouldn't have even known that he wasn't a Von Erich.
Yeah, that's the thing that surprised me too while looking that up.
Well, and what's interesting is that, when I was talking to him, he goes, well, they trained me. I was like, well, who trained you? He goes, the Von Erichs trained me. They discovered him. And so what happened was that they found this guy that could pass as a Von Erich. His body build was, incredible. The dude was a bodybuilder, and he was a bodybuilder, and he was a power lifter. So he was transforming from a power lifter to a bodybuilder. So his body was immaculate, right? Or is just incredible shape. And that's what caught the eye of referee David Manning. And he was walking around, he was golfing one day with a tank top and shorts right after a competition. So he just caught David's eye. And he could pass as a Von Erich relative. There's a lot of Billy Jack Haynes did come down to world class for a little bit of time. Billy Jack Haynes has a chapter in this book about him. Lance, when he wrestled as Ricky Vaughn, went up there and even lived with Billy Jack Haynes. And so he talks about his friendship with him and everything. Like I said, there's a chapter with that guy's name on it. So it's interesting that how the book kind of goes down different avenues of things, and that's why I don't think people are going to expect what they read in this book. But Billy Jack Haynes, to finish my thought, was on a podcast, and he had came out and said, well, the Von Erichs were going to make me Billy Von Erich, and that was the furthest thing from that. That was never a consideration. David Manning said that, look, he didn't even look anything close to the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs, the storyline was that they were German, right? Because Fritz was the evil German, and Waldo Von Erich was the evil German, and so, or Nazi or whatever they were, and so they had European characteristics, and Lance fell into that, and he looked like that. And so that was, when they saw him for the first time, they didn't care if the guy could wrestle or not. Right. And he asked them, hey, have you ever thought about wrestling? And he's like, never. It was the furthest thing from his mind. But because he had the look, that, they were willing to, go all in on this guy.
Well, like you brought up earlier, trying to capture in the book, exactly how big of stars the Von Erichs were back then, and that being 30, 35 years ago. Some people also listening or reading the book don't realize how strong kayfabe was back then. If they've only been watching wrestling for the last 10 years, that, they could present somebody like Lance Von Erich, and you'd have no other choice but to believe that he was really a Von Erich. It was such a closed society back then.
Right. And that's interesting that you bring it up, because that's a big topic of the book. That's a big topic of the book. So when Lance is breaking into the business, he happens to catch the 2020 episode with Eddie Mansfield. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Okay, so he where Eddie Mansfield came out, broke kayfabe, shared all the tricks in the book, or many, or several, whatever. And so Lance was familiar with the name because people weren't happy with Eddie Mansfield at that time. And so, he was really surprised when, in 1987, Fritz came out and broke kayfabe. And he was really surprised, and I'll share this. This is a pretty good nugget from the book. When Mike Von Erich died, and now I'll paint you a little picture. So at this time, when Lance is working there, Kerry's alive, Mike is alive, and Kevin is there. So David's already passed away. He passed away in '84. That was one of the reasons why they started looking for Lance. So he's he's working a lot with Kevin and Kerry, he's working a lot with all three of them actually. But he said he couldn't even count how many tag team matches he was with Kevin and Mike, but they had more of a working relationship. Kerry had a friendship with, and he liked Kerry a lot. And Kerry was hard not to like. A lot of people said that. Almost everybody I interviewed for the book, they just couldn't compliment him enough on how easygoing and friendly and fun he was to be around. I mean, I'm sure he had his bad days, but a lot of people said that he was really good in how he made people feel when they left the room. That they felt good. Kerry made people feel good around him. He made them feel good about himself, and that's why people liked hanging around him. Well, when Mike Von Erich died, he had no plans to go to the funeral, and it was just because, he didn't know him. Even though he had worked together for, I guess, a year or whatever it was, he just didn't know him. You got to remember, Mike was gone for a long time. from the time that Lance was there. So Lance got there in October of '85. Mike had just got out of the hospital. It took him several months. I do not know when he came back. I would guess that it was sometime in the summer of '86. That would be my guess. But he committed suicide in April of '87.
Wow.
And so when he went to he was working or whatever, and someone from the office just said, "Hey, you need to be at the funeral tomorrow." And he goes, "Well, I wasn't planning to go." He said, "Yeah, we need, they need you there." And this will tell you how strong kayfabe was. So when Lance goes, he's just taken back by the amount of cars in the parking lot, and he's taken back about, how many people are there. And so he walks in, and he's looking for fellow wrestlers that he knows. He is quickly met by one of the security guys that work for Fritz, and said, "Come with me," and escorted him to the room where the family is, with the casket with Mike in it, where in the beginning, before the private family setting, and Lance was brought in there, and Lance talks about dealing with that and what he experienced in there, and he talks about that day in detail. I think readers are going to be really interested to hear. A lot of people are probably, I've gotten a lot of stuff on Facebook like, I hope he's not trying to, elevate his status by tearing up the Von Erichs, or, he doesn't do that. There's some hard facts in this book because, hey, 3 brothers committed suicide. Cuno Hernandez OD'd on cocaine. There's a chapter on Cuno Hernandez. Yeah. There's a chapter on Chris Adams.
Oh, wow.
And so there is, I think people are going to be really surprised. I can't wait for you guys to read the book. You got one coming too, Dave. I've got an envelope with your name on it. But I think you guys are going to be really surprised when you read it, because I think a lot of people are expecting it to be a book about Lance Von Erich. And don't get me wrong, it is. Yeah. I go to my Facebook page, and I posted a small portion of chapter 1. Like, I don't know, maybe a page. Just read that. And that's I'm just kind of teasing the book and getting people to understand, just kind of see a little bit of it. But it's not just about Lance. His name is really Kevin Vaughn. It goes into David Manning, explains how wrestling worked back then, how the NWA title worked back then, why it was. A lot of people thought maybe Kerry winning the world title was a good thing, but it really wasn't a good thing for the world-class promotion because it put him on the road. And he was bread and butter for that company. So things like that, I think people are going to be surprised to read about Bruiser Brody and his, Lance thought he was just when it came to wrestling, just an amazing businessman, and had his head screwed on right for the business, and he was a pretty wild man when it came to the ring. And, so it's stories like that, I think, that are going to, kind of take readers back, because when I said that, a lot of people think it's going to be one thing, Lance didn't want to write this book. Lance is not worried about elevating his status. I think Lance decided to write the book with me because I wanted to write the story so bad, and I just think he was like, all right, if you think, if you think it's worth writing, let's do it. So it was kind of like that.
I'm definitely excited about it, because anytime I see anything about world class or anything, I watch it. A lot of people put stuff out on YouTube, and I've watched so many documentaries on the Von Erichs, and like you bring up, if people do watch those stories, you can kind of come to your own conclusion that there was definitely some behind the scene thing, that, you know, all these tragedies that happened, you know, weren't just by accident, so to speak. There was definitely some mental issues going on with some of those boys.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sad story. I mean, it really is. I lived up in North Texas. Actually, I grew up 10 miles from where the Von Erichs grew up. So,
oh, wow. They
yeah,
were like your backyard neighbors.
we had Von Erich sightings from time to time. It wasn't every day, but, you know, to the Von Erichs up there were a household name, even if you liked wrestling or didn't like wrestling. You didn't have to like wrestling for the Von Erichs to be a household name, because they were ours. You know what I mean? They were.
Yeah.
If you ever lived in a city that had a hometown celebrity, you know, you kind of felt like, you know, maybe you didn't know them, but you kind of felt like you did because they were yours, right? Well, that's what the Von Erichs were. That's what the Von Erichs were.
And that's kind of the difference from growing up and watching the world-class product to watching the WWF product. You know, Hulk Hogan and Mr. T were so larger than life. They were untouchable, like movie star status, where you got more of the feeling from the Von Erichs, like we said, just the way that they were approachable when they were in the ring, that it was different.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the thing is they couldn't, you know, they were out in town. They really couldn't stop for, you know, a long period of time, because if you stopped them, they were going to be there for quite some time.
Yeah, they were going to get mobbed.
They were going to get mobbed. Give you a funny story. One of the first times we went to Six Flags, I think the very first time we went to Six Flags, it was a real hot summer. Had to be 81. I think it was 81. Well, we went to Six Flags. My parents took us to Six Flags. It's a big amusement park in North Texas. They're all over the place, but
yep.
It's super hot. It's Texas, right? Summertime. We're waiting in line forever. And I think my dad was like, I think he was about to pull the plug on the whole Six Flags. You know, like, this was a mistake to come at this time of the year. And we're waiting in line, for a long time. And all day long we were doing this. Well, all of a sudden, everybody left the front of the line, just scattered, and we went all the way up to the front. And my dad was like, "Hey, what just happened?" And they go, "The Von Erichs are over there."
Oh, that's why everybody's running.
And my dad was like, "Well, we'll follow those guys for the rest of the day." You know, where are they going next? You know, and so that gives you an idea. They probably didn't enjoy themselves at the park that day. You know, because they couldn't.
Vinny, so after we launch this episode and everybody hears some of these stories, they're going to want to know when this book is finally going to be out. It's going to be soon, right?
Yes, it is. I am releasing the book November 16th.
Oh, wow. So you got like 2 weeks and you're ready.
Yeah. Actually, a week from tomorrow? A week from tomorrow.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, we're halfway through already.
Yeah.
I know. I can't believe it.
And I don't know when you're going to launch the show, but I do have free shipping up until the 15th. And, I encourage people to take advantage of the savings on there. But I think they're going to be really, I think they're going to enjoy the book. It's 25 chapters, and it has almost 40 pictures. The foreword is by David Manning, and there's a guest passage by Dusty Wolf, a good friend of Lance's, who wrestled with Lance when he went over to South Africa. They met in Dallas. He talks about that story. But there's a guest passage by Kevin Von Erich as well, and I reached out to him, and he wrote something. I asked if he would give me a quote for the back of the book, and his quote was a little longer to fit on the back of the book, so I put the paragraph in the front of the book. So,
yeah, I mean, I hope that it starts bringing back some of these other guys from World Class too. Up here, there's a big circuit of guys that go around and do autograph sessions and do these podcasts, and you don't see a lot of the World Class guys. You even know, me and you met by me reaching out to Lance and trying to get him to come on the podcast. And, I know there's still so many stories out there from these guys that I'd love to hear.
Yeah, and I tried to, I am working on Lance to kind of get out there a little bit. There's some times that he's agreed to, great, I'll do the phoner with you. And I said, well, it's already done. It's like our schedules we can't get our schedules to link up. But he actually said that, look, I'll do some phone interviews with you. And, but, I'm writing with I'm just kind of going with the fact of, hey, if he does, he doesn't, I can't pressure him. He's really far removed from the wrestling business.
Yeah.
His take on it was, who cares? Dude, you don't understand. I mean, this was a big, this is it's big history stuff for wrestling fans,
Sure.
And
yeah, I mean, he could go. You guys could go out and do a tour and have book signings all over the place if he chose to.
Yeah, I think
it brings like all like the younger generation out to be like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, wow, his stories are crazy.
It's an interesting story. The funny thing that Lance, in the book, he credits guys. I told you, he said the guys that he thought that loved the business, he thought were really good at it. But he also credits the second generation wrestlers, guys like the Von Erichs, the Funks, the Youngbloods, these guys that, Matt Bourne, guys that Kelly Kiniski, that had family in the business, fathers and, second generation. And he was like, those guys, he said, I worked with a lot of good wrestlers. Those guys were special. There was something about the second generational wrestler. And so, it's funny how the story's told in the sense that, like I said, there's a chapter on Billy Jack Haynes. It has a name on it. It's his chapter. Steve Simpson has a chapter. Ric Flair has a chapter. Kerry Von Erich. Mike Von Erich, Chris Adams, Juno Hernandez. I don't think a lot of people have you ever heard the story when Chris Adams went to Israel and he was drinking and he got mad because he couldn't get his phone call through to his wife? Did you hear that one?
No, I haven't heard that one. No.
Okay, well he gets so mad that he goes downtown or goes down into the lobby to straighten that out. And because he doesn't get the help that he wants, he super kicks the bartender or a person who worked at the hotel.
Wow.
And he super kicks him, and he injured him severely. And and there was a manhunt for him, and they had to sneak him out in the middle of the night and get him out of there. So that story is in the book.
Steve Simpson, there's another name that I haven't heard in quite some time, but another big one from down there that, you didn't hear much after World Class, but was a huge star down there for a while.
Well, and Lance met him up in Portland when he was Ricky Vaughn.
Okay.
And so, and because Steve Simpson knew people or had friends, and, he was like, hey, if you get to Dallas, help me get down there, And then, before you know it, he was wrestling down there too. What an athlete he was, right? And they were, him and Lance were really good friends, and so it's stuff like that, there's a chapter in there called Japan and Friends, and I almost called it Bruiser Brody, because Bruiser Brody is a big part of that chapter, and he talks about his interactions with him and his observations about him. I think people are really going to like those stories, and I'll share. There's I don't know if you ever heard about Lance going to Japan, but Lance went to Japan for Fritz, and it didn't work out well, and he basically AWOL'd, and he left in the middle of his tour, and so he talks about the repercussions of that in this book. So,
and the also some repercussions. I guess they had some kind of contractual dispute, him and Fritz, right? And that ultimately led to him leaving. And I think you brought up earlier, Fritz broke kayfabe and basically said, he's not really a Von Erich. And, how did that affect Lance as far as moving on? He really didn't have much of a career after that I remember, did he?
Lance wrestled up until about 1996.
Oh, wow.
And he wrestled as an international star.
Wow, there you go.
And you will read about that. He was big in Durban. They loved him in Durban. He wrestled in Malaysia, and he wrestled in South Africa. He wrestled quite a bit in that side of the country, and and he wrestled as Lance Von Erich. And I think, because he kind of fell off the face. We thought he fell off the face of the earth, but there's I don't know. I guess a good 10, 12, 12 chapters on World Class. There's probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 on Portland, and then you've got another maybe 6 or 7 that cover South Africa. And I think people are, again, these are stories that people are going to be interested in. And I think people are, again, they think, oh, it's a book about Lance Von Erich, golly, you heard about the plane ride where Chris Adams headbutted the pilot, right?
No, I haven't heard any of these stories, so
well,
this is going to be great.
You'll read it in the book.
Well,
and Lance had to go to court for Chris on that, and so it's, again, these are some of the things that are in the book. It's going to be a good read.
Well, I certainly can't wait for it. I'm happy to hear that it's going to be out in another week or so. I look forward to getting that copy. And this
from you after.
This episode
is he going to be able to share the book with you?
He better share. If not, I'll come over and steal it from him when he's not looking.
Yeah, we'll definitely have a chance to trade off on that, and hopefully after we get a chance to read it, maybe we can do a follow-up interview and go over some more of the stuff once people have that book in their hand. Most of these interviews I've done, the books have been out already, so we've had a chance to read it and talk about what's in there. We don't want to spoil too much of the book, of course, and let people get it and read it for themselves.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. I love talking about the book. I love talking about wrestling. Again, I think it's a good read. I had a couple friends read it to help me kind of clean it up a little bit. We did the best we could on that, but one of my friends he goes, look, I hate sports. I can't stand wrestling, but give me 3 chapters and I will try to finish it. And don't take offense if I can't. I said, that's fine. That's all right. He the next day he called me back. He said, I read the 3 chapters. Send me 10 more.
Yeah. Because it's not really, it's about wrestling, but like you say, it's all intertwined with, Texas history even and
Right.
stuff like that.
It talks about how wrestling was, how it ran. It's like they talk about how in the book where it always helped to have a heel as opposed to a baby face be the champion, because nobody wanted to see the baby face get beat, right? They wanted to see the baby face beat the bad guy. And
sure.
So
exactly.
when you look at it wrestling like that, when you look at the bottom line, back then, they traded, the NWA traded talent, and so that's why you had, Billy Jack come from Portland to Dallas for a little while, or you had Al Madrill or Brian Diaz go to Portland or go to Mid-Atlantic, or Buddy Landell came down here to World Class, and you had these guys shifting around. Mr. Ebony came from Portland, he came down to Dallas. Of course, he wrestled all over the United States, but I mean, you understand where they moved around, and you were like, oh, they move around. But then, when you read the book, you think, oh, well, that's why they moved around, because, they traded and they worked out. Hey, we'll send you this guy. Hey, we need this guy. Or, hey, can we use this guy? We'll send you this guy. And, I didn't know about any of that. And so I think people would be interested in that. I think people would be interested in how he kind of like ties in the Eddie Mansfield and the kayfabe situation with the Von Erichs, and again, of course, it does it. It touches a lot of tragedy. A lot of people passed away, and and he was, a lot of stuff happened between 1982 and 87. A lot of stuff happened between 1985 and 87. So.
Well, I look forward to it, and thank goodness it's going to be out for the holidays. So probably a number one on everybody's Christmas list that is a wrestling fan. It should be
New York bestseller right here. There you go.
Well, that's what I told Lance. He goes, how well do you think this book is going to be? I said, it's going to be a New York bestseller. And he just kind of gave me a laugh.
Got two of us in New York, so you never know. We're going to start promoting it and getting everybody to buy it.
And you know what? I think people need to read it. Like I haven't even shipped out the books yet, and I thought, I was gonna have more sales than this, and then I had to come back down to earth. No one's read it yet. But when people read the book,
you gotta get that one person to read it and tell their friends, and then their friends tell their friends, and be like, "Yo, you gotta read this book. It's amazing."
I think people are gonna enjoy it. It may not be Hemingway's finest, but you know what? It's a good wrestling story, and I encourage you to read it. I know that you're gonna enjoy it if you do.
And then once
we're glad you.
All the other wrestlers will come knocking on your door and be like, "Come write my book. Come write my book."
One could only hope, right?
Well, we're certainly glad you took the time to write it, and we're certainly glad you took some time to come on our show and speak about it.
Yeah, it took me 3 years to write, a little over 3 years.
Yeah, people don't realize it takes a long time to write these books sometimes, like you said, not only writing it, but, adjusting it and getting people's opinions on it, and you want to put out the very best product.
Yeah, and you know what? I did get derailed. I remembered one of the questions that you asked Christina, and I'll answer real quick. Back to you said, how did me and Lance work on it? After I reached out to him, we called each other probably about once a week, and we probably talked, I don't know, probably about a year or so. Almost not every week, but regular basis for about a year, and then from there it was like follow-up phone calls, and down there in the end, this past year, we would, I'd call him up like in the middle of the week. Hey, what is this? Or help me out here, or remind me about this, and then he'd shoot me his answer or whatever. But yeah, I mean, he was definitely involved in the process, which was good, because I couldn't have had the story without him, of course.
Exactly.
David, thank you very much for having me on your show, and Christina, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking to you guys very, very much.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and these are good ones because it's very little editing for me, and I'll probably have it up later today or tomorrow at the latest, and I'll tag you on Facebook and everything, and we'll just keep promoting the heck out of this book because it sounds like it's going to be a great one.
Exactly.
I appreciate it. Hey, you guys reach out to me anytime. You can call me anytime or message me on Facebook, and I'll be talking to you soon.
All right, Vinny, we'll go out and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
All right.
Yes,
thank
enjoy
you.
it.
Great talking to you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.